Spoiler warning. This is your spoiler warning for this episode. In this episode, we get into some of the finer plot points of The Flash, ALF, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and the first Avengers movie. Check out the podcast description for the timestamps of those discussions if you don't want to be spoiled. We'll also discuss Supernatural and Threshold, but those conversations are spoiler-free. Now, on to the show. Today, we're continuing our exploration of TV series endings with a deep dive into how different endings can come about, from the show's standpoint.
Hey guys, Jared, Jensen, and Misha here, and we have some big news that we wanted y'all to hear from us.
That was Jared Padalecki in 2019. You could probably argue that this entire episode was inspired by this one video featuring Jared, Jensen Ackles, and Misha Collins making a big announcement to the SPN family.
We just told the crew that though we're very, very excited about moving into our 15th season, it will be our last. 15 years of a show that has certainly changed my life. I know it's changed these two guys' life. We just wanted you to hear from us that though we're excited about next year, it will be the finale, the big grand finale of an institution.
Yeah, we've cried some tears, and we'll cry some more.
But we're going to save the emotion for next season.
Grateful, and we'll work all the emotion into next season.
We talked about this in advance. We're like, let's not get emotional about it. Let's just try to be cool. And
he's hanging on for dear life. I know him.
We love you guys, and this family is not going anywhere, even though the show will come to an end.
I will say this: a little word from Mr. Eric Kripke, the creator of this world and these characters, that in a show about family, it is amazing, and it is the pride of his life that it became family. So thank you guys for that.
Thank you.
So, if you're not a fan of SPN, well, how the hell did you end up listening to this podcast? But actually, if you've never heard this clip, let me provide some context. Back in the heady days of early 2019, the CW had just renewed Supernatural for a 15th season. But come March of that year, the three main cast members of the show, Jared Padalecki, Jensen Ackles, and Misha Collins, recorded this video telling their audience that the 15th season would be their last. It's actually unusual for show creators to get to decide that a show has run its course and it's time to put it to bed. I know I only played audio here, but I think you can hear that they were all emotional about the announcement, even though they felt like it was the right move. By being able to warn fans and watchers that this would be the last season, I think they hoped the direct message would help ease the fears and concerns of the fans. Although I don't think everyone appreciated the timing.
Jared, Jensen, and Misha had posted the announcement of the imminent ending of Supernatural. And I remember going, oh my God, did you have to do this right before a convention where we have thousands of your fans who are going to be completely devastated and upset? It wasn't like, it wasn't abrupt, obviously, because they announced that they were going to do another season. But there was going to be, thousands of Supernatural fans gathering at our event in less than 24 hours and I was going, oh my God.
Steph Dizon, Senior VP of Creation Entertainment, was in the midst of running a Supernatural convention when the news of the show's ending finally dropped.
And so I walked out of the office and immediately got stopped by some fans. And the first question out of their mouth was, are we going to still have conventions? And I thought, what a cool thing to be concerned about,
For the record, yes, they definitely continued to have Supernatural conventions. Anyways, right away, Steph started hearing fans at the convention swapping theories and trying to guess how the show would finally play out.
I think then a lot of speculation began. Chatter amongst the fans was trying to predict how it would end, how they would end it. And a lot of people have their different theories of, how it's going to end. Are they one going to die? Are they both going to die? Are they going to grow old, with kids and, what's going to happen? So the fan theories kind of started manifesting at that show. And
It was certainly an upsetting announcement for plenty of fans, but at least they had a chance to work up to saying goodbye to their beloved show. And it sounds like the anticipation after each episode in the 15th season to explain how it all slots together became a fun weekly community puzzle. But this is a really unusual case. Most TV shows have no control over when they'll end, or even how much notice they'll have when the time does come. For example, here's Fish, a podcaster who you met last episode. He told me a story about the show Alf.
I'm not quite old enough to have seen Alf, but that show ends on a to be continued. Like, it's one of those kind of famous stories that apparently they thought they might get canceled, and they were like, well, we'll do a to be continued, and there's no way they'll cancel us after that. And then they still canceled them. It ends with like Alf getting captured by like the FBI or something. He's going to be taken to be experimented on, and it's to be continued.
I had no idea. Apparently, the 1980s sitcom ended on a cliffhanger with the titular alien character trying to return home to his original planet. The final scene shows Alf getting captured by the government, followed by a screen with a simple message, "To be continued." Alf's story was eventually resolved with a movie in 1996 titled Project Alf, which only has a 57% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. I guess some fans face a tough trade-off. Stick with the cliffhanger, or watch a terrible movie for some resolution. This also makes me wonder whether a cliffhanger versus a well-resolved ending affect whether a show's fan base stick around for the long haul. I haven't met any diehard Alf fans lately, but that's just one case. This was actually something that Rob Benedict mentioned during our conversation. Unresolved endings, that is, not Alf. Speaking of a show he worked on before he joined the cast of Supernatural as Chuck Shirley,
I did a show called Threshold in 2005 for CBS, and it was a great cast. It was like Carla Gugino, Peter Dinklage, myself, Brent Spiner. It was such a great cast, and it was a really interesting, like, aliens, and there were all these secrets, like, what does this mean? And we're all kind of uncovering it a la Lost.
Ah yes, Lost. The famously not divisive TV series that was all the rage in the mid-2000s.
It was like the year after Lost's, the Lost pilot, so every network had a show like this. And ironically, CW, which was the WB at the time, had Supernatural. Like, it was the same year that Supernatural premiered. So every network had kind of a Supernatural kind of pilot.
Ha! All roads lead back to Supernatural. I knew it.
Anyway, CBS had Threshold, and the people who know that show really, really liked it. It was really onto something, and it was all Lost-like, and it was revealing what the mysteries were, and certain characters were had been affected by this alien presence. Anyway, it gets pulled like halfway through the season. So after like 13 episodes, so like there's no ending, there's no explanation. It just ends, and that was a bummer. It was a bummer being in it. You don't get to see your character's storyline wrapped up, and so yeah, it can also happen like that, where you're like, there's just no end. It just ends. It just stops.
Threshold had quite the stacked cast and a pretty interesting premise, but it never got past the first 13 episodes. The show was bumped from one time slot to another, which made it hard for fans to know when to tune in. Producer and writer David S. Goyer also claims that Threshold was built to be more of a serialized show than the network was comfortable with. All these factors led to its premature cancellation.
So yeah, I think on a show like Threshold, there was no, you don't want to invest in it because it doesn't go anywhere. It'll be fun for a little bit, but yeah, people who are Threshold fans who come up to me at the conventions, they're all like, it's a shame. It's a shame. It's a bummer.
That's all they're like, sorry for your loss.
Yeah, exactly. I like the show and it didn't go anywhere. So
sadly, it's a rare privilege to get to complete a story with some forewarning. Most shows are unceremoniously cut, like Threshold or another cult classic, Firefly, whose cancellation is also partially blamed on airing issues. Apparently, Fox aired the first season in the wrong order, which killed the on-air ratings. But not every show is blindsided by their cancellation. On those rare occasions where creatives get to know well ahead of time that their show is coming to a close, it's a gift that they don't take lightly. Take, for example, Jeff Hirsch, a writer and
most recently, I was a co-producer on The Flash. I started actually in season 3. I was an assistant. I was the writer's PA.
Jeff worked his way up to full writer in season 6 and eventually made it to co-producer during the final season of CW's The Flash, which aired in 2014.
A show went for 9 seasons. I always think about like the people who maybe started watching it maybe like in high school, like how much their life would have changed in like almost a decade.
The show started in 2014 after the successful launch of another DC comic TV series called Arrow. From these 2 early successes, the CW built a whole world, affectionately called the Arrowverse, that included other lesser-known characters and elements from the world of DC Comics. This included the shows Arrow, The Flash, Supergirl, Legends of Tomorrow, Black Lightning, Batwoman, as well as some surprise cameos from NBC's Constantine and Lucifer from the Fox, later Netflix, TV series. The Arrowverse was even visited by the infamous Ezra Miller, playing a version of Flash from another part of the multiverse. All of these crossovers and connections were allowed to thrive from their shared home base on the CW.
Especially for the CW shows, it was really an opportunity to take these comics and kind of create our own multiverse version of it.
But by the time 2023 rolled around, most of these other shows were no longer on the air. Although, sadly, not all of them got endings.
Arrow got an ending, Supergirl got an ending, Flash got an ending. But the rest didn't get a chance to end the way they wanted to. And look, I am just as upset as Legends fans that we didn't get a proper ending to Legends, or to the Batwoman fans, or just going through it. It was a bummer to see those shows not get their chance to end their story.
I was plenty upset too at the non-ending that Legends left us with. But that's not why I asked to talk to Jeff. With The Flash as the last man standing, I wanted to hear how the writers approached closing out an entire multiverse. After all, they knew the end was coming before that last season started.
So the quote-unquote Arrowverse kind of ended with The Flash, or did end with The Flash, and that's a lot to carry on one show.
No joke, dude.
There was a lot of discussion of like how to end this show. Like, we're not ending the Flash. Our ending of the show is going to be different if they ever did like a final Flash comic, or if there is ever another Flash movie series and they have their final movie. It's going to be different, right? It's its own thing. So we have to be honoring our characters and honoring our story we're telling.
The Flash sat at this really unique intersection because the show needed to have a meaningful end for their show and their characters, but it's not like there weren't already new Flash comics in the works. It would just be this iteration of Barry Allen being put to bed. Not all versions of the Flash ever. And at the same time, as the last man standing, they had a chance to find little ways to pay homage to the other series of the Arrowverse. And also, at the same time, the writers need to wrap up all the story arcs of the supporting cast in The Flash and make sure that they were given a proper send-off. Balancing all of these priorities wasn't easy.
And the reality of making a TV show is you're on a very tight schedule, you have a very tight budget, and you are at the mercy of schedules, you're at the mercy of all sorts of things. We were fortunate that we weren't told within a week to go the show was ending. We were told before the season started, this is gonna be the final season. We knew that as soon as we said that, there were gonna be people who hadn't watched the show in a few years who were gonna tune in this season because they still loved it.
And that's another thing. Plenty of viewers, admittedly, myself included, had dropped off across the 9-season run. But with the announcement of this being the last season, old fans were much more likely to tune in and see how it would all wrap.
It's coming to a close, and you're looking at and saying, well, what are the things that we must see in our last season of The Flash? What are the things we've been holding on to that we knew we wanted to get to and make sure those stories are being told and those characters are being honored as much as we can do in a very short order.
I don't envy Jeff as the showrunner for this final season. As Jeff told me, sometimes that meant that they weren't able to include every Easter egg and fun plotline that they'd been saving after almost a decade on the air.
Now I look back at other shows and I'm like, oh, I bet I know why that choice was made. You start to realize oh, that's not about the writing. That is about something else, and you can start to kind of put that together and be like, oh, that's why that ended that way. And that character didn't come back, or you start to understand a little bit more.
But Jeff Hirsch and the rest of the Flash's creative team stayed mindful of the heart of the show. And Jeff believes that's what allowed them to bring the story to a comforting conclusion.
We always had on our whiteboard that Greg Berlanti,
co-creator, writer, and executive producer of The Flash,
put on the first day, which was heart, humor, spectacle. Those are the 3 ingredients to a Flash episode. And that is true no matter what Flash episode you turn on. Thinking about this character, Barry Allen, who, in the first episode, we learned what's driving him, and it was the murder of his mother. And that really is what set the story going for him. It kind of leads to him becoming the Flash, all these things. But it's so much about him dealing with this trauma of losing his mother, and then he eventually loses his father. But there was so much about losing his parents that colored his whole story. In our show, we end up ending with him and his wife Iris giving birth to their first child, for real this time, not just coming from the future, which is also part of the show. But to me, I feel like that was so important to what our show was, because so much of the show was about him overcoming this pain of his childhood, and then now to finally complete his journey of becoming a superhero and fully being the Flash, getting his gold boots by the end, and also now a parent, finally fulfilling the legacy that started by his parents for him.
For Jeff and his writer's room, there had been lots of comic book style dramatic plots over the years, but the final season really came down to reflecting the emotional core of the story.
That Barry-Iris relationship is so beloved, and it's to make sure we gotta protect this relationship, and make sure that we are honoring this amazing love that we've built between these 2 characters and the actors' chemistry and all the things that came together that made that one of the most beloved couples in genre TV. That's something really important. And I think that's part of why the ending we end up with is with them more united than ever, and now finally parents and getting that new journey together is that you go back to it, the beginning of the show, in the pilot, Barry says, this story is about a girl, right? Or it's about this, he's got this unrequited love for Iris. And then the show ends with them having their first child together. That, you step back and you look at that, you're like, oh yeah, that worked great.
For me personally, I love this ending. It's a nice reflection on and callback to how it all started. So many television series have fun, engaging openings, but fail to achieve a satisfying story arc. The Flash, despite not quite making it to the 10-year mark like they hoped, still managed to bring it all back around and deliver an ending that resonated with fans. And for only having 13 episodes to work with to finish out a series, I think that's admirable.
We ended the show, and Barry comes to this realization that he was chosen, thanks to Oliver telling him at one point, but he was chosen by the Lightning. And he at the end, he's like, I now have family, and like, I'm still gonna be the Flash, but I can choose now, and I'm gonna send Lightning out there to the next people who are worthy of the Lightning. And we leave off kind of letting you know that, like, you know, in this Flash verse that continues on in our imaginations, we have a few more Flashes, classic Flash characters from the comics that people would love to have seen come true. And I think that really is what we were hoping to do, is kind of like, you know, we're sending it out there. Like, we're not done with this. The Lightning's still out there.
So we've talked about a show that got to choose when it would end, Supernatural. Shows that didn't have a chance to write an ending, Threshold and Alf. And a show that had 13 episodes of runway to land a nearly decades-long series, The Flash. But this next example, I think, has a different, kind of odd relationship with endings. It's a show that ended, then, surprise, it was renewed. Twice. Fans will know that I am talking about Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I spoke with
Craig Titley. I was a writer on S.H.I.E.L.D. Came on season 2 up through the end. Started as a consulting producer, ended as an executive producer the last couple of seasons, and started out as a giant fan of the show. So I was a fan and a writer.
And I also spoke with Jeffrey Bell, who was the executive producer and co-showrunner. Similar to The Flash, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was a TV series set in a much broader comics universe. This time within the world of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, with a plot and characters existing concurrently with the big Marvel movies. As Jeffrey explained,
Marvel in general is much more than superheroes. And our other challenge was we didn't have, $200 million an episode to sort of have our superheroes do cool stuff. And so we approached it originally as not all heroes are super.
Instead of spinning off their own universe like the Arrowverse, Craig and Jeffrey remained within the same universe of the much bigger Marvel movies.
We had to rely on telling good stories. We didn't have a lot of visual effects. And so we felt like if we could tell really emotional, interesting stories, people would care about, Fitz and Simmons and Coulson and Skye or Daisy or Quake or whoever she became. And then along the way, find ways to tie in.
Fans of the Marvel movies probably recognize the name Coulson as the agent who was killed by Loki in the first Avengers movie, setting the heroes up to finally put their differences aside and come together as a team to defeat the big bad. But Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., set after the Avengers, features Agent Coulson as a prominent character. He frequently refers to a mysterious trip to Tahiti, which seems to be a joking reference to his time away from S.H.I.E.L.D. A time that, to be clear, was right after his memorable on-screen death in the Avengers movie.
And so going into season 5, we really believed it was going to be the final season. And so we went at that hard. It was our 100th episode was that season, and we designed it to be the finale. And that's why it was Coulson-centric, because the show had begun with the mystery of how Coulson had died and Tahiti, and the fact that we brought that back to him dying and actually, spoiler alert, putting him in a happy place at the end of the season seemed like a wonderful bookend to the beginning. And as we were doing that, we got the record scratch of there might be another season. And so the problem for us was we had just sent our number 1 on the call sheet to Tahiti to have the last few weeks, months of his life. So how do you have a season 6 without Agent Coulson?
Essentially, the writers and showrunners did a great job wrapping up the major character arc of Agent Coulson at what they believed was the end of the show.
The writers felt really good about our season 5 ending. We felt it was emotional. It tied up the plot. We sent our young people off to do new wonderful things. So, and I think fans responded well to it as well. I think it was a well-received finale. But then, of course, how do you bring back a guy you just killed was our challenge moving forward.
So they off-screen killed off a main character, wrote a satisfying, well-received ending, and then season 6 was greenlit. So...
Season 5 was sort of the conclusion of our big arc, and we kind of looked at season 6 and season 7 as bonus packs in a video game. One was in space and one was time travel. And I mean, the writers, we kind of took the training wheels off and went a little batshit crazy. I mean, we told some, and I'm looking at one of the writers right now who really loved leaning into the craziness. But, we told the kind of stories you could only tell in like season 6 and 7 of a series, and allow the actors to do things that they might not have done before. And I know we had a lot of fun doing it, but we broke a lot of rules along the way.
Just like an expansion pack in a video game, the writers had completed all the main quests. So they got to add a new region that allowed them to explore new ground. Based on what I've seen in the changing media landscape, not many creators get that kind of license and freedom anymore. Here's Craig again.
I don't think this is common with a lot of shows, that we all loved the show. It wasn't like The Job and, oh no, we got another season and looking for a way out and another gig. We love the show, I think, as much as the fans. And what I like about season 7, I don't know if we ever stated this out loud, but in a lot of ways it's sort of a love letter to the show itself.
I've done something like 20 interviews for this podcast so far, and I can tell you, the ending of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was both unusual and fortuitous.
And I think we did get to end sort of on our own terms twice. But even I always felt like those last 2 seasons, they didn't feel like we were just filling the order to make more episodes. Like heart and soul went into that just as much as in the first 5 seasons. And I think that resonated.
Yeah.
So often, shows are cut without any fanfare or attempts to explain away plot lines that creators were hoping to address in future seasons. I'm looking at you, Walker Independents and Gotham Knights. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and The Flash had it good. And I do believe that SPN was unique too, with the way that they directly addressed their fans when they made the decision to wrap up the show. Although, how that all shook out, well, let's save that for the SPN-specific episode. Next time on In Defense of Fandom. What about shows or universes that never end? That could be shows that have internally consistent universes like Star Trek or Star Wars. There's also universes that can't end by conceit of the show, like Doctor Who. And what about reality TV? Does it matter how a season or even the entire show of a reality TV show like Survivor ends? We'll explore these and more next episode. See you in 2 weeks. Editorial support was provided by Dr. Anna Funk. Music was composed and performed by Chris Scott. Cover art was designed by Liz Hand. In Defense of Fandom was made possible through an unhealthy obsession and your support via Ko-fi. Thanks especially to Meg B and Catalanta, who are the first supporters of this season of the pod. If you're not already supporting the show and you'd like to, you can find a link in the show notes to our Ko-fi. A one-time donation of any amount will get you access to behind-the-scenes content, including the audio of my full conversation with Richard Speight Jr., Destination Toast, Jeff Hirsch, and other guests you'll be hearing from across the season. Your support is deeply appreciated.